Louisiana, 1853. Sweltering heat hung heavy even in October, the kind of thick air that slowed time and suffocated secrets. Nestled in Iberville Parish, not far from the Mississippi, was the Belle-Marie Plantation, a Greek revival house of grand pillars white as bone and shutters painted the green of sugarcane. The house sat like a crown above a field of suffering. To travelers passing through, Belle-Marie was a triumph. To locals, it was legend. They called it the Pearl, a symbol of Southern success. But history is selective. It tells the stories of the men who built fortunes and the women who hosted garden parties. It leaves out the pain, the chains, and the things buried too deep to name. In 2022, a routine state preservation survey brought archaeologists to Belle-Marie. The plantation had been in ruins since 1901, when a fire gutted the upper levels, but the basement remained. During excavation, they found a bricked-up stairwell beneath the main cellar. Behind it, a second chamber, low-ceilinged, windowless, carved into stone. Inside that chamber was what looked like an iron cage, hooks embedded in the walls, scratches on the stone, human fingernails lodged in the floor. But that wasn't the worst of it. Hidden in a rusted chest, sealed in tar cloth, was a leather-bound ledger, yellowed paper, neat cursive, ink faded by time and sweat. It was simply titled Private Inventory. Each page recorded names, ages, offenses, punishments. Next to each punishment was a mark, tally lines, and next to those a chilling column header, duration of noise. Some entries had notes, fainting within 9 minutes, no sound after first strike, vocal cords failed, see page 43. Every scream, recorded, measured, studied. It became known quietly as the Scream Ledger. The man who kept it was Silas Duval, the plantation owner. A former shipping magnate from Charleston, Duval had come to Louisiana to escape scandal. He arrived in 1840 with 3 sons and a wife who rarely appeared in public. He bought Belle-Marie at auction, doubled its output within a year, and was said to be obsessed with silence. A home of order, he once wrote, must first conquer chaos of sound. In public, Duval was a patron. He donated to the parish church, paid for a schoolhouse, lent money to neighboring estates. But behind the walls of Belle-Marie, a different rhythm played, a ritual of violence, discipline, and scientific cruelty. A letter recovered from the chamber, unsigned but likely penned by his overseer, describes the chamber in use. Mr. Duval insists on timing. 3 watches, 1 at the door, 1 at the gate, 1 on the wrist. No intervention until he raises the shutter. I've learned to deaden my ears. Duval's wife, Eleanor, was known only in whispers. A neighbor recalled seeing her once, thin and pale, watching from the upper balcony like a specter. She never blinked, wrote Mary Tesson, a seamstress who visited the house in 1852. I felt her eyes before I saw her. There was something resigned in her face, like she was waiting for something final. The enslaved people at Belle-Marie, at least 143 by census records, rarely lived past 30. Many were transferred from other properties after being labeled unfit. A doctor's letter from 1851 notes mental instability and repeated vocal agitation among new arrivals, as if crying out was a defect, as if pain was not a reaction but a failure. The ledger itself, now held under restricted access by the Louisiana State Archives, documents at least 73 individuals subjected to experimental acoustic restraint. Each subject is listed by first name or number. Some names are crossed out, some have stars beside them. One entry, dated May 18, 1853, reads, Subject 41, boy, claimed to be 12, screamed for 4 men 17s, laughed during first correction, noted for re-evaluation. The boy's name was Isaac, no surname, no family listed. The only record of him outside the ledger comes from a journal written by Eleanor Duval. Found hidden in the lining of a burnt chair, her words are sparse but revealing. He watches the stars. He sings when no one listens. Silas says his laughter is a challenge. But I hear in it only life. Perhaps that is what frightens him most. That was the last entry, dated July 3rd, 1853. A month later, Eleanor Duval disappeared. No death certificate, no grave, just gone. Silas claimed she ran off during the night. The house slaves were interrogated. One woman, known only as Amma, was beaten for hours. Her back bore the marks until her death in 1890. What happened next has become lore. The Belle Marais fire started on the night of October 1st, 1901. Locals say it burned from the inside out. No lightning, no storm. Some say it was revenge. Others say it was justice. But the chamber, the Macabre chamber, as locals now call it, survived. As did the ledger. What also survived were the whispers, the children who never returned, the cries that never left the stone walls, and the legacy of a man whose obsession with silence spoke louder than any scream. After the discovery of the chamber beneath Belle Marais, a team of forensic historians and archaeologists was assembled by the Louisiana State Preservation Office. Dr. Angela Rochard, the lead historian on site, had seen her share of disturbing discoveries: slave quarters, iron collars, hidden whippings posts. But what she found in the Macabre chamber, she told me, was different. It wasn't just punishment. It was methodical, controlled. There was an intellectual cruelty to it. Whoever designed that space wasn't trying to break people randomly. He wanted to study their breaking point. Dr. Rochard's team began cataloging every object in the chamber. They found a child's tooth in a small dish, blackened rope ends, and a metal pipe with bone tissue still fused to it. But most chilling was the soundproofing. Thick layers of early cotton batting and tar sealed into the walls. The chamber was designed not to keep sound out, but to keep screams in. Over the next few months, they unearthed additional journals from the ruins, most of them badly damaged by fire and time. But a few pages were legible. One, dated December 1852, written by Silas Duval himself, read, "The voice is both gift and weapon. What separates man from beast is not reason, but restraint of expression. I will train them. The ones who learn silence may yet be kept. The ones who do not must serve a purpose." It was, in essence, a manifesto. But how could something so heinous go unnoticed? I found myself asking that again and again. The answer was buried in the social structure of the time, one that prized wealth, reputation, and obedience above all else. Local records show that between 1851 and 1854, 7 young boys were reported missing from nearby plantations. All were labeled runaways. None were searched for, no rewards offered. Their names matched entries in the Scream ledger. And then there were the wives. Eleanor Duval's journal wasn't the only written record from inside the house. An unsigned letter, found in a blackened bureau drawer, was addressed to a friend in New Orleans. It read, "I hear them even now. The sounds echo beneath my dreams. Silas says I must adjust, that this is the burden of progress, but I see the children's eyes. They know, and I cannot unsee what I have watched. I fear I have become one of them, watching from behind the curtain as he records the unmaking of innocence." The letter ends with a final line, written hastily. "He's begun with Isaac again." I spoke with a descendant of Amma, the housemaid who suffered for Eleanor's disappearance. Her name is Ruth Levine, 68, a retired teacher who lives in Baton Rouge. She still keeps a lockbox of oral histories passed down in secret from mother to daughter. "My great-grandmother used to say, the walls had teeth, that house. It swallowed people." Amma said Eleanor tried to help once. Took the boy outside at night to look at stars, told him stories from the Bible, but Silas found out. After that, she stopped speaking altogether. Amma said she died inside before she ever vanished. But the ledger, painful as it is, also holds clues to what happened next. In July of 1853, the entries stop. Abruptly, the last written name is Isaac. Subject 41, unresponsive after 22 minutes, eyes fixed, no vocal sound detected, session terminated. After that, the remaining pages are blank. What happened that night is unknown, but the implications are clear. Something changed. Whether Isaac died, escaped, or something worse happened to Silas, the silence that followed was permanent. A week later, Eleanor vanished. 3 months later, Belle Marie stopped shipping sugar. By January 1854, Silas Duval filed for personal medical withdrawal. He disappeared from public life entirely, but he didn't leave Louisiana. In 1855, parish records list Silas under a different name, S.D. Roche, residing on a remote property south of Houma. No plantation, no children, no servants, just a shack, a single cornfield, and a new grave dug beside the house each year. In 1860, census takers recorded the house as abandoned. They found a locked trunk. Inside was a child's drawing, stars and a field, and the word quiet written 7 times on the back. That drawing is now stored in a restricted case at the Louisiana State Archives next to the ledger. And Isaac? We don't know. There is no grave, no further record, but his story, his voice, survives in the documents, in the damage, and in the unbearable silence that followed him. Continue in the next chapter. You said, continue. ChatGPT said, narrated by Daniel Harrow. By the fall of 2022, the macabre chamber beneath Belle Marie had become more than a historical discovery. It was a wound reopened, one that bled into modern headlines, classrooms, and communities. Word of the Scream ledger reached national media. But even before the news anchors arrived, a quiet investigation had already begun. The Louisiana Bureau of Historic Justice, a task force created after the 2019 Truth and Reconciliation Act, assigned case analyst Miriam Polk to review the documents. Her job was to examine human rights violations buried in pre-20th century events and determine whether modern legal frameworks could be applied. "I wasn't expecting what I found," she told me, flipping through a photocopy of the ledger with gloved hands. It was almost like Silas Duval saw himself as a kind of scientist. He documented pain the way a botanist documents plant growth. Polk was the one who found the code buried in the margins. Each page in the ledger had strange notches in the corners, some carved, some marked with graphite. At first, they seemed like printing defects. But upon closer examination, Polk realized they followed a sequence. It was Isaac who'd left them, a series of dots and dashes, Morse code. He was counting. He had left messages, encoded around the pain, behind the names, within the horror. One translated line read, "Still here, still me, still watching the stars." Isaac had survived, or at least he had endured long enough to speak, if only in secret scratches and marks left between screams. The discovery prompted a full excavation of the chamber and surrounding foundations. That's when they found the tunnel. Barely wide enough for a child, the crawl space extended nearly 40 feet from the chamber's far wall to a hollow beneath the tool shed. Inside the tunnel were fragments, cloth, buttons, and a small wooden box. Inside the box were 2 things, a child's drawing of a night sky and a lock of red hair tied with a string. The implication? Isaac had help. It wasn't a stretch. Eleanor Duval's diary made repeated reference to the child with starlight eyes. She wrote of sneaking him books, of whispering prayers through the vents, but her final pages had always been cut short. Now Polk believed Eleanor helped Isaac escape, or tried to. On October 1st, 1853, the night Belle Marie began to burn, neighbors claimed to hear thunder, even though no storm was reported that evening. The fire spread unnaturally fast. The entire main house collapsed in under an hour. But the basement held. So did the macabre chamber, which means someone set the fire and intended for the chamber to survive. The chimney stack acted like a vacuum, Polk explained. It drew the heat upwards, sparing the cellar. Whoever did it knew the structure, knew the risks. They burned the world above, but preserved the evidence below. At the base of the old chimney, another item was found, blackened but intact. Eleanor's wedding band, wrapped in scorched linen, tucked inside a child's shoe. The theory emerged slowly but steadily. Eleanor set the fire. She helped Isaac escape. Then she disappeared, perhaps with him, or perhaps to cover his path. She became the ghost Belle Marie never deserved. But Duval's story didn't end with the fire. Records uncovered from a now-defunct asylum in Lafourche Parish documented a patient admitted in 1856 under the name Silas Rowe. Described as disfigured, mute, and prone to violent tapping fits, the patient died in 1871. Among his possessions was a single book, a treatise on the mind's ability to deny pain. Inside the back cover, he had written one line over and over again: "No sound, no sound, no sound." He was buried in an unmarked grave behind the asylum. In spring 2023, that grave was exhumed. The remains were confirmed through dental records and family lineage. It was Silas Duval. His legacy, long hidden under aliases and shadows, now fully unearthed. The discovery sparked outrage and action. Descendants of those enslaved at Belle Marie petitioned for the site to be converted into a memorial and cultural center. The state agreed. Plans were drawn, funding approved. The chamber would remain untouched but visible, a dark echo carved in stone. But the most profound part came from the families themselves. Isaac's name had never been complete. No last name, no roots, no trace beyond those carved marks. So they gave him one. The families of Belle Marie came together and chose a name: Isaac Freeman. They built him a marker, not a grave, because his final resting place remains unknown, but a star-shaped stone set into the ground above the tunnel where he'd once crawled for freedom. Beneath it reads, "He counted pain but held on to the stars." The official raid of Belle Marie came not in the 1800s when it should have, but in 2023, 170 years too late. And yet, it still felt like justice reaching backward through time. After the final phase of excavation revealed the tunnel system and coded messages, Louisiana's Attorney General authorized a full forensic investigation of the Plantation ruins under modern criminal review. It was unprecedented. No living suspects. No prosecutable case. But that wasn't the point. The purpose was declaration. The state recognized the crimes committed within the Macabre chamber as crimes against humanity. Forensic teams spent 6 months combing every square foot of what remained. Ground-penetrating radar revealed mass soil disturbances beyond the sugar fields. Cadaver dogs trained to detect historical remains signaled repeatedly in an overgrown grove west of the main estate. They found 28 unmarked burial sites, small, shallow, many belonging to children. Each one became a crime scene, each one a voice finally heard. Dr. Angela Rochard, who had led the original archaeological team, now coordinated efforts with the state coroner. Her voice, steady but hollow, cracked when I asked what stayed with her most. "The bones were small, Daniel, some so light I could lift them with 2 fingers, but in those fingers I could feel their weight, their history, the fact that no one came for them." Ruth Levine, descendant of Amma, stood with state officials when the first child's remains were reburied under their own name, given posthumously by the families who traced lineages and oral histories to identify them. "I always wondered why my great-grandmother wouldn't sing lullabies," Ruth told me. "She'd hum but never sing. I asked once. She said there were songs she couldn't bear to give to the air. Now I understand." Uti, in the months that followed, the Belle Marie property transformed from ruins into reckoning. The Macabre chamber was sealed behind reinforced glass. Visitors can now walk a path above it, reading excerpts from journals, the scream ledger, and recovered testimony. The iron hooks were not removed, nor the cage, nor the scratch marks. Nothing was sanitized. This wasn't a place of comfort. It wasn't meant to be. On March 7, 2024, the state declared Belle Marie a national site of conscience. Survivors' descendants gathered for a ceremony, unveiling a granite wall inscribed with 143 names, every person documented as having lived and labored on the plantation. Where records failed, the wall bears the phrase, "Name withheld by history, voice restored by truth." And in the very center, beneath an open arch facing east, one name stands alone: Isaac Freeman, the child who counted pain and dreamed beyond it. A recording of the Morse code he etched into the scream ledger plays quietly from a mounted speaker nearby. It clicks faintly over and over, the same final message: still here, still me, still watching the stars. In Washington, the U.S. Department of Education began issuing new guidelines for how slavery and experimental cruelty must be taught in history classrooms. Belle Marie is now included in the national curriculum, and something else changed. Louisiana passed House Bill 328, the Historical Redress Act. It requires any state-listed plantation with a history of human experimentation or punitive cruelty to disclose those records publicly to descendants and to visiting schools. It is not repair, but it is recognition. For Ruth Levine, it wasn't enough, but it was a start. There are still people who want to remember Belle Marie for its columns, its sugar, its elegance, she said at the dedication. But I won't let my great-grandmother's silence mean nothing. I won't let Isaac's screams vanish into polite history. At the end of our final interview, Ruth placed something into my hand, a small locket, rusted but intact. Amma said Eleanor gave it to her, told her to hide it if things ever got bad. Inside was a scrap of fabric, and this. She opened the locket for me. Inside was a drawing, a child's drawing of a night sky, crude stars, a crescent moon, and at the bottom, in a childish scrawl, free. And so, Belle Marie, once a monument to control and cruelty, now stands for something else. A warning, a record, and maybe, just maybe, a promise. Today, Belle Marie rests quietly under cypress shade, no longer hiding. Where once stood men in pressed coats and polished boots, men who measured a child's screams by minutes and decibels, now gather teachers, students and descendants, tracing their own bloodlines through records once scorched and buried. I returned to the site last spring. The path down to the viewing deck is lined with placards, each marked with a single name and age, if known. One reads, Amma, housemaid, age unknown. Another, Isaac Freeman, estimated 12. And others, simply unknown. Child, voice recorded. The Macabre chamber lies beneath thick glass and red clay stone. Cold light filters through above. It's quiet there now, eerily so. But that silence no longer serves cruelty. Now, it honors memory. I stood for a long time over the spot where Isaac once carved messages between pain and defiance. The faint Morse marks have been preserved, magnified behind protective casing. They still say the same thing. Still here, still me, still watching the stars. But this time, he is not alone. A memorial bell stands beside the exit path. Visitors are invited to ring it once, for every name remembered. Children ring it more than once. Often, loudly, the sound rises into the branches above. In Baton Rouge, the Belle Marie case set off a domino effect. Historians and archivists began reopening forgotten ledgers across the South. In Charleston, Savannah, Natchez, old homes with old shadows began to stir. One record led to another. More stories surfaced, other Isaacs. One in particular, a boy named Samuel, once labeled mute by condition. A ledger found in North Carolina showed he had been punished repeatedly for failure to respond with proper voice. His family, now living in Oklahoma, had never known where he came from, until now. They came to Belle Marie last month, laid flowers at the edge of the child burial grove, and they rang the bell. Even the descendants of the Duval family, long scattered across the country, returned. One great-great-granddaughter, Catherine Duval Moore, made a public statement at the 2025 memorial service. There is no defense, no excuse, only truth. We reject our ancestors' actions. And we choose to be part of the healing, not the hiding. Healing. That word echoed through every conversation I had. But healing, as I've learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means facing. And there is no place that forces you to face quite like Belle Marie. Inside the visitor center, Eleanor Duval has a room of her own. The torn pages of her diary, what remains, are mounted in glass, surrounded by a simple inscription. She watched. She tried. She burned the house, but not the child. Of all the voices I found in this story, Eleanor's may be the most conflicted. Was she complicit? Yes. Was she afraid? Absolutely. But did she act in the end? I believe she did. And Isaac? That's the question I ask myself most. Did he survive beyond that night? Did he live? Did he escape into a future where no one measured his voice or chained it to a wall? We'll never know for certain. But the name he carved for himself, Freeman, echoes far beyond that chamber now, into textbooks, into classrooms, into justice. He may never have spoken with his mouth again, but he never stopped speaking, through scratch marks, through stars, through silence broken by bells. His scream became a name, and his name became a legacy. A year after the chamber was opened, a new exhibit launched at the Louisiana Museum of History in Baton Rouge. It was simple in layout, one room, one purpose. The walls were dark, matte, sound-absorbing, no music, no ambient noise. Visitors entered through a narrow passage and emerged into stillness. At the center stood a replica of the Macabre chamber. Not the instruments, not the hooks, but the proportions, the space, the crushing low ceiling, and most importantly, the silence. You could hear your heartbeat in that room, your breathing, the creak of your shoes. That was the point. And beside it stood a digital wall of names, programmed to rotate through every identity tied to Belle Marie. Some were full names traced through family lineages. Others were first names pulled from journals. Many were simply child, girl, boy, unknown. But one name lingered longer than the rest: Isaac Freeman. I watched a group of teenagers read the names in silence. They lingered longest at Isaac's. One girl, she couldn't have been more than 15, looked up and said quietly, "He wasn't just a victim, he was a witness." And she was right. When this podcast began, I didn't know Isaac. I only knew a whisper. Something's wrong in Rosewood. But stories have echoes, and sometimes those echoes lead you backward, through time and pain, to a place like Belle Marie, to a boy like Isaac. He was never supposed to be remembered. The system was designed to erase him, silence him, use him, but he refused. He etched his name into the margins of cruelty. He marked the stone not for vengeance, but for survival, for remembrance, for others to find. And now every schoolchild who visits that museum learns his story. Not just what was done to him, but what he did in return. He left behind a map, a code, a testimony, and that is what survivors do. They leave signposts for those of us still finding our way through the dark. On the anniversary of the chamber's discovery, the governor read a proclamation naming March 7th Isaac Freeman Day across the state of Louisiana. Not a holiday, not a celebration, a reminder. And every year at Belle Marie, a new voice reads his final message aloud, translated from code. Still here, still me, still watching the stars. Some people say history is written by the victors, but sometimes it's written in the scratches left behind by the ones they tried to break. And sometimes, just sometimes, those scratches become scripture, because what hides behind a perfect smile can be the darkest secret of all.